back from a camshaft swap, and unfortunately now we have a host of other super fun electrical issues. So the camshaft swap went perfectly fine. We had some complications with the cylinder heads being a very peculiar casting that's not really shared anything with a standardized LS casting aside from the rocker arm usage. But as you can tell, I have been not having a terribly great time with this. So we think we may have figured it out after doing a lot of digging and a lot of searching. I think I may have actually found a random long-lost issue that only a handful of guys have had. So I'm well aware of 04 issues where the ABS module will randomly short and then people will have a pretty gnarly no-start condition on it. As you can tell, things have been pulled apart and we've been looking through wiring and back probing the ECM, making sure we get power there in the body control module. So if we go ahead, lock the car, unlock, key in the ignition, good contact on the security ring, everything functions as normal. So we get blower motor, AC works, but check oil, service vehicle, fuel gauge, and an ABS fault. So after doing that, and obviously we have a clutch all the way in, absolutely nothing. But it's been a very weird intermittent issue. It seemed like the car was almost allergic to the dyno since we got pulled onto the dyno once, no start. Pulled onto the dyno a second time, a different day, no start. But the car would start outside, wasn't particularly temperature dependent, did it on a 50-degree day, did it on a 95-degree day. But it seems like this ABS module, the actual electrical side of it, may be fizzled out. I know that some people will also say that since it's actually stored the ABS codes in the ECM itself, that the ECM is going to need to obviously be reflashed or touched up. But thankfully we were able to drive the car home. I can pull the start relay, and since it doesn't have keyed ignition, I can turn the ignition on the key and then jumper it with this. But when it does that, it has no control from the factory ECM, which the Holley's tied into, and so then the alternator doesn't charge the car, which is sick. So I drove home, used a 1.5 volts. Thankfully this battery's new and good, so not really having an issue there. But obviously I'm not going to want to jumper this and drain the battery every time. So I've got a new ABS module on order. So thankfully I should be able to replace just the actual electrical portion of the module. There's no fluid in there, no O-rings, nothing. Need a couple eTorx bolts to come out, and then I can leave the rest of the actual pump in there and just replace the module. But this does seem to be a very isolated issue. I've only ever heard of a couple other people ever having this issue, but even after spending all of the time back probing the body control module and the powertrain interface module and the ECM, and then randomly the car will start and it'll do a repeat start of 3, 4, 5 times in a row, not temperature dependent. We thought it was the sun load sensor in the dash for a bit, but that doesn't seem to be a likely culprit because VATS was already taken out of the vehicle, and I don't think that a sun load sensor would necessarily nuke the whole car like this. But after talking with a couple guys and some other people that have had random experiences like this where the car will start maybe a couple days a week, but it just randomly loses power, nothing to the ECM at all, that seems to be like a fairly reasonable culprit. Thankfully I snagged the last one for an 0506 car that I know of for really, really cheap. As a brand new old stock piece in the box. So I'm going to get that replaced because that's something fairly low effort, and it's hopefully shouldn't take more than a couple hours. But in the meantime, I finally did get my new Forge Stars mounted up. Yes, I know I need to lower the rear end about an inch or maybe 3/4 of an inch. Man, these things just look so good. They look so nice, exactly how I was hoping they would. That front fitment is god near perfect. Almost perfectly flush with the top of the fender without running a whole bunch of camber in it. Thankfully, unlike my bent front welds for this thing, which are somewhere on the other side of the car, these ones are actually perfectly round and they all hold air exactly as they should. So once we get the ABS issue figured out, then hopefully we'll be back on the road with an alternator that charges, and I'll be able to actually put some miles and get these new wheels dirty. But unfortunately the car has been a bit of a thorn in the side for the guys at Scram lately, so I was glad to get it out of there so that way they can focus on other stuff that they need to do on the business side, and kind of leave me to my devices to figure out some of the GTO specific issues that we had. Unfortunately though, I think we either have ring flutter or something else going on inside of the short block, just because this car just does not want to make more than 700 wheel horsepower. It went from 17 pounds on the last time at the dyno, same pulley setup. This time it made 19 pounds, same thing, 700 wheel horsepower at about 6,000 RPM, it just shuts off. Doesn't want to make any more power. We pulled plugs, checked timing, gap, adjusted our fuel, timing itself. Nothing really seemed to be working on this, so we're going to hopefully go back on the dyno sometime and take this 295 off, and we're going to put the 3.1 back on, which made 12-ish pounds, and we're going to see if it has any difference, because I might just be at the limit of what these rings can do. Maybe the rings didn't set right when I was breaking this motor in. Could be a host of things, but worst comes to worst, it's not that hard to yank a motor out of this car and then just plop it back in. So maybe we'll have a short block rebuild or a re-ring this upcoming winter, since, you know, maybe I have a pinched ring or something along the lines of that somewhere. So we will hopefully get that figured out. But the car made a brutal torque curve. We had a couple dyno pulls that said like 900 something pound-feet of torque, but for some reason the car just does not want to make more than 700 something wheel horsepower at about 6,000 RPM before it just coughs and sputters and breaks up. But the car drives much nicer now at lower RPM. I'm still thinking it's going to just absolutely annihilate these Continentals that are on it, since these new Mickeys are quite sticky. There's still rocks and stuff stuck into these, but I'm just happy to have the car back home. We've got the ABS module on order. It'll be here this week. Hopefully I'll get some time since we're slow at work. We'll get this thing whipped in, and then I'll actually get back to hopefully putting some miles on the car, and we'll revisit the dyno with a quick pulley swap and a couple other things later this year.